Hello, and for once I'm reading a script. I noticed while talking about the dichotomy of the origins of Sanguinius and Angron in the last video, I sounded like an idiot. So to best communicate this idea, I gave a small script to best describe this concept. To give the vague outline of this dichotomy I'm referring to, it's roughly what I believe to be the point where Primarchs overlap, and discussing how those Primarchs also differ from one another. However, I'm going to be rambling. I'm a rambler, and about other stuff probably going to get brought up, but I'll try to keep it all in the same vein. I'll try. So let's start it off with what I was talking about in the last video with, Sanguinius and Angron. With them being like two sides of the same coin. Get it out of the way, yes, I've heard that Angron's innate psychic ability to take away pain from others as like an empath or whatever the fuck. But the nails kind of took that away from him, so he's kind of just a butcher like Lehman Russ, and as Sanguinian's wrathful interiors like. So they're similar despite the original purpose of Angron being different. Like I was saying with Angron, he kind of let the rage consume him, while Lehman Russ and Sanguinius could have embraced their rage like Angron did. They chose to diverge from that path and make their own destiny, if you will. Like in the back to the original video, I kept referring to the Blood Angels as the Gilded Age of Space Marines, referring to their more compassionate and noble facade, which is hiding their more, not crude, but violent nature underneath. And while I do like this comparison, I feel like it needs a little bit of tweaking. While it applies very well to the Blood Angels themselves, it kind of falls a little short when it comes to Sanguinius himself. Because while Sanguinius did have the red thirst and kind of this wrath inside of him, he bears more kindness towards his, found family on Ball and the Emperor and all that. Even requesting their religious views not be destroyed by the Imperial truth. Where was I? I like that about Sanguinius. He's returning the kindness that the people of Ball gave to him, because they were originally planning to just kill him because he was a mutated humanoid thing that fell out of the sky. But the reason I like that he chose to reciprocate the compassion is because it kind of gives the whole nature versus nurture story with in contrast to Angron, where Sanguinius was nurtured into a kind person even though he had that rage inside. Angron had nature, and the nature of the gladiatorial pits and the nails biting, and it was just what threw him over the edge to become the berserker we all know him and love him as. But back onto the Sons of Sanguinius themselves, not necessarily Sanguinius. Going back to the Gilded Marines, there's a certain chapter that comes to mind, while many successors like the Flesh Tearers, Flesh Eaters, Bloodthirsters, Blood Drinkers, people along that line, they kind of lean more into the bestial vampirism of the Blood Angels. There's one, what's the word? There's one fucking chapter that comes to mind that kind of foregoes that and is purely gold through and through, and that is the Lamenters. Now, despite the Lamenters' yellow armor and their depressing name, you might be enticed to think that they are a son of Dorn, but they're not. They are part of the Sanguine Brotherhood. We all know the Lamenters' almost comical misfortune, which I think actually takes place of their rage, implying that you cannot really create or have a blood angel without the hardship of the universe. Kind of like, the Gothic aesthetic and storytelling where they kind of romanticize the hardship of the interior conflict and all that. But on to, so we've talked about Angron a little bit, and we've talked about Sanguinius a little bit, but bring the discussion to a bit of a colder point. While you can describe Sanguinius and Angron as the two sides of the same coin, I think that it's fitting to refer to Leman Russ as the grooved edge of that coin, while the Emperor's executioners revel in their task, being unapologetic savages on the battlefield. The Space Wolves kind of ride the line between the simple warhounds of the battlefield, like the World Eaters are, and the kind of noble people and soldiers of the Imperium that the Blood Angels are. The term itself, the Emperor's Executioners, is kind of like a self-given role of the Space Wolves. They're kind of made this whole theory about the Emperor using them as tools and being designed for a specific purpose, and they believe that their innate rage is I just accidentally went to the bottom of the script. They believe that their innate rage was a design choice by the Emperor, so they are the Executioners, which kind of leans into more of them just embracing who they are. But if you look at the trials given to the newer aspirants of the Space Wolves and how it kind of mirrors the life of Leman Russ, how he was at one point feral, but he learned to become human, for lack of a better word. It kind of is the man versus nature conflict, where you can see that they're kind of choosing to fight their primal instincts, similar to the Blood Angels. And I think that is neat. And hypothetical viewer, I'm sure you're definitely engaged enough by this video but to be just like screaming at your screen that I haven't brought up Perturabo and Dorn yet there. Like the epiphany of the 40k dichotomy. And I'm going to make you wait even more, because I'm going to bring up how I think Dorn and Conrad have a similar sense of honor and justice. Hear me out. The Night Haunter became the benevolent dictator of Nostromo. Conrad Kurz grew a very kind of stark, nuanceless, knowingly hypocritical concept of justice, even though it is unfortunately a concept lost on some of his Nostromo-born sons. I believe it was carried somewhat over by the more Terran-born sons, because they were, kind of trained by the Emperor, so kind of giving into that Space Wolf, what's the word? Space Wolf pre-designation theory that they had. His sense of justice can be seen through some of Conrad's actions, even though he's probably not the, pinnacle of good virtue, as you might think. Before being taken and inducted into the head of his legion, he kind of hunted down all the crime lords of Nostromo to get to the top he used some precognitive abilities, which to him seemed more like prophecies, because the way the Warhammer wiki put it is he had an imperfect precognitive ability where the Emperor could see all of the possibilities. Conrad could only see one thread, and it was just a very dark thread. But he thought that was the only possibility, so he became kind of like a slave to fate, where he saw these visions as orders that he had to follow. So in his mind, he was actually doing good, good, quote-unquote. And I think that I can't really blame him for that, because you look at somebody like Magnus the Red, who how do I put this? They kind of got tunnel visioned with their own with their own kind of unique abilities where, Magnus thought magic was the answer to everything, and if something was brought to him through that, then that must be the answer. Conrad is kind of the same way with his visions, even though he didn't like what he saw necessarily all the time. One of the times that he didn't think that what he saw was good was actually before the Horus Heresy, where he during the please apologize. I apologize if I say this wrong, but the Shirat compliance campaign, where he saw visions of his chapter and what they would become as kind of just these mustache twirling villains, like I was saying. And he thought, the visions of his Night Lords fighting the sons of his brothers was enough to make Conrad kind of fall into a depression where, all this, teaching and ethical stuff that he was kind of working towards with this chapter, as ass backwards as it was, he was working towards that goal, was kind of just falling apart right before his eyes before it even happened. And then the last notable time I can remember his sense of justice kind of like peeking through as he was losing his mind is kind of in the eastern fringes when the Emperor sent some assassins against him. After all of his visions, he saw it kind of best that, even though he was working towards what he saw as a just cause, he saw that his actions were unjust and possibly evil. Well, not possibly, they were definitely evil. And it was kind of just best that the Emperor removed him, like he had removed many other problems, for lack of a better words. And I think we can see that in his own words right before he did get assassinated, which I'm about to read here. Your presence does not surprise me, assassin. I have known of you ever since your craft entered the eastern fringes. Why did it not have you killed? Because your mission and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of all I have ever said or done. I merely punished those who had wronged, just as your false emperor now seeks to punish me. Death is nothing compared to vindication. There we go. And you can kind of see that he himself is aware of the wrong he has done, but he saw it as kind of, no other way of going around, doing about what he needed to do. But enough about Conrad. So how does this absolute nut job stack up against Dorn? Why do I think that they have similar senses of justice? So earlier, about a couple minutes ago, I mentioned the Shirat compliance campaign, and Dorn and Fulgrim were there, and eventually Conrad worked up the courage to tell Fulgrim of all these terrible visions he was having of like, hey, my brothers or my sons are going to fight your sons, and it's going to be a whole lot of hoopla and evil shit going down, and I don't want that to happen. And Fulgrim told Dorn of these visions, and Dorn, I guess not really fully comprehending Conrad's power, decided to hold him accountable for these visions he was having, and went to confront him directly. And it's not specified what or how happened, but most of Conrad's personal guards were dead, except for I think there was a sole survivor, and Dorn was gravely injured. And this was all before the Horus Heresy, like before Isfahan, all that, as you could probably imagine, because Fulgrim and Dorn were on speaking terms. Outside of the compliance campaign, Dorn is just generally the most honorable of the honorable of the Primarchs. You can see that it definitely rubbed off, like even 10,000 years in the future. You got like the Black Templars have their honor codes, and it's kind of a stereotype for the stereotype for the Sons of Dorn to kind of carry out that sense of honor. Like the Executioners, they had such a strong sense of honor in this blood pact one time that they actually almost got branded traitors during the Badab War. Luckily, that blood pact did kind of give them a, what's the word? Like a half off on their punishment, because they kind of, it was like we owed the Afterclaws. But anyways, this isn't about them. All in all, I think the primary difference between the Praetorian Terror and the Night Haunter is Conrad believed that the ends justified the means. Dorn was more for a fair and even system where, it was more agreeable with less of the morally questionable processes that Conrad specialized in, for lack of a better word. Alright, so it's time to address the elephant in the room, the big hazard-striped elephant, the duality of Perturabo and Rogel Dorn. If you told me before getting into 40k that they wrote one character and just decided to make just make a copy of him and call him evil, and told me that that was Perturabo and Dorn, I believe you. That's how similar they are. But as I kept reading through it, I kind of noticed despite how similar they are, like past the surface level, they're pretty much the opposite of each other. It's almost impressive to the writers of 40k and 30k and all that, how well they've done. Last week's video, I mentioned that the Iron Warriors had kind of like a philosophy of as sure as the sun will rise, which I think I like, but I want to expand on it. So what I was trying to say is kind of like the Iron Warriors, under the leadership of Perturabo, became tools, again, like, I already said it, like the Space Wolves has said. Similar to the, yep, So what this means, at least to me, is that the Iron Warriors kind of never saw the challenge as it was as like a way of making a name for themselves or any of that. They always took the hard knocks, the jobs no one else wanted because it just wasn't fun or didn't bring enough glory to them. Because at the end of the day, it didn't matter what it was going to get done for the Emperor, stuff like that. Or the Imperial Fists, in contrast, they had a very similar do-or-die mindset, but they took more pride and glory from their engagements, and were generally just around the Emperor more. So he it's like they're doing the same thing, but the boss is just like next to your coworker who's doing the same thing as you, so you're not going to get as much recognition. And you can see how that is kind of wearing down on the Iron Warriors, because they're doing the same thing, but they're getting all the praise and stuff. Another key distinction in the Twin Chapters is the fact that Dorn was selected to be Praetorian of Terra. Because they a little bit flashier and around the Emperor more often. And as you can imagine, that kind of would build more resentment between the two. And just to take a quote more directly from the 40k wiki. Again, that place has been great for making this script. That and just like random scattered memories and hearsay that I have in my head. There's another key difference in the personality between them, like I was saying with the honor and all that, kind of getting the morale up. Many who view the matter with enough dispassion see, rightly or wrongly, a legion eroded by too much horror, too much attrition, and death in the service of a cause to which they went unheralded and unthanked. And that quote's kind of talking about the Iron Warriors and how because they took all the bad jobs trying to seek the recognition that they just never got. Because where was I going with this? Because Perturabo believed that he should get recognition through merit alone, where Rogel Dorn was more of a slightly more personable, despite being very similar attitude-wise, and that's what the next bit of the script here is about. with how similar and abrasive their personalities are to their brothers. Some stories I can remember, but I couldn't find any actual sources for. So take it with a pinch of salt, but I do remember hearing that Dorn personally scolded Lionel Johnson to his face and cursed the Khan behind his back, just on two separate occasions. So, on top of the aforementioned fight with Conrad, as you can imagine. So he's definitely a bit of a square hole into a round peg figure when it comes to this, but you know. So the Lion was scolded for his lack of progress during the Great Crusade. I remember it was because he was being slower and more cautious. He was technically just retreading ground that other chapters had already been and calling it progress, and Dorn was not having it. And then he cursed the Khan behind his back for disappearing after I believe he was disappearing, or he was like lost or something, because he sent basically his whole chapter to the Lionsgate space station during the Siege of Terra instead of staying at the fortress where he was mostly needed, I guess you could say. However, Dorn didn't hold any lasting kind of resentment or hatred for these brothers, where Perturabo, I remember there was this one story of him personally antagonizing Magnus the Red, because Magnus kept asking for the other Primarchs to like build a machine so he could commune with the warp or something like that. I don't remember what the machine was, but basically everyone was like, "No, Magnus, that's a terrible idea. I'm not building that machine for you." But Perturabo built it. He managed to make it work and all that. And then he destroyed it right in front of Magnus to kind of like hammer it through Magnus's thick head that this is a bad idea and no one's going to do it for you. And stubborn people need stubborn means, but it was definitely put a sour taste in Magnus's mouth, and he was generally like that to most of his brothers. They did have some common ground, however, about where was I? They did have some common grounds. They both actually were pretty neutral towards Fulgrim. Neither of them liked the kind of fancy, aristocratic Fulgriminess that he has, but they both appreciated his perfectionism in all forms, and they appreciated it because they they were very similar, but just in their little autistic siegecraft that I have, and they have. Overall, looking at, Dorn before his disappearance, not death, and where Perturabo is now, especially after the heresy, I feel the roles have somewhat reversed with them, with the grief of losing so many of Dorn's brothers, kind of putting him in more of a emotional space. He was a little bit more bitter about things. I think he was a little bit too hateful and aggressive when it came to his final stand on the battle barge where he went missing. And in contrast to that, Perturabo was kind of taken a step back and removed himself from everything, and he's looking at the path he's walked behind him, and he's kind of like, wow, I was a piece of shit back then, and he's kind of chilled out, kind of becoming more reserved. Seeing the error in his ways, basically. And I think that, ironically as it is, as ironic as it is, their rivalry with each other during the heresy, when it reached a boiling point, that afterwards they kind of like switched sides, kind of, going back to the same sides, different sides of the same coin. They've kind of, switched all of a sudden. Well, all of a sudden, it's been like, I don't even know how many thousands of years since Dorn disappeared. Oh yeah, it's really interesting to see how they kind of somewhat switched, because the whole thing about this dichotomy is they were so similar at these certain points that they really could have gone either way. And here we're literally seeing that. They went both ways. and they could have become the same person, or they could have switched places if the story had gone even a little bit differently. Um, but that's all I really want to talk about. Thank you for watching me and my soapbox. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will see you all in the next video.